Hello. Пожалуйста, всем вернуться к своим микрофонам,
Okay.
пожалуйста.
Would you like to go back to your seats and microphones? Please make your way there.
Последняя часть
We would like to start the final part of our two-day-long
Я
symposium,
имею честь
and
представить
I'm really
слово
honored to be given the floor to a very important person here,
Вaldemar,
Rui Valdemar,
руководитель аппарата
Chief of Staff of the Municipality
Лиссабона,
of Lisbon,
делегат и координатор
Delegate and Coordinator of International Projects
Tota Pulchra, myslím, думаю,
for Tota Pulchra, Rome,
эксперт в области
expert in
институционального
institutional
управления
management
и
and
культурной дипломатии,
cultural diplomacy. See, it's very important. Cultural diplomacy.
Португалия.
Portugal.
Mr. Rui Valdemar,
Mr. Rui
please,
Valdemar,
you can begin.
over to you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all. It's a pleasure to be in this symposium and to hear all these interesting opinions and commentaries. The aim of my speech is to connect, obviously, my own situation as a cultural strategist and an advocate of cultural diplomacy in Portugal, and with the Armenian ethos, of course, with a significant impact of Armenian culture in Europe. So the most obvious subject is a well-known Armenian art lover and philanthrope. Ladies and gentlemen, on the morning of the 20th of July 1955, in a suite at the Hotel Avis in Lisbon, an Armenian by birth, a British subject by passport, a French resident by long habit, and a Portuguese by deliberate choice, Carlos Sakis Gulbenkian, died at the age of 86. He was undoubtedly one of the healthiest private individuals of his century. His vast fortune and personal collection of art and rare books would, the following year, become the foundation that bears his name, a Portuguese institution established in Lisbon with a global reach and an Armenian ethos. I begin here, in a hotel room in Portugal, because the question these symposiums ask about the place of the Armenian ethos within the European matrix finds in the figure of Gulbenkian an answer more eloquent than any treaty. Cultural identity is portable. Civilizational belonging is chosen. What is chosen, when chosen well, transforms the host as much as the guest. To comprehend why Gulbenkian could die an adopted son of Portugal without diminishing his Armenian identity, and why a Portuguese foundation could become a global anchor for the Armenian ethos, we must first examine the enduring Armenian condition within the history of European civilization. Armenia was the first kingdom in the world to adopt the Christianity as a state religion. In the year 301, and Saint Gregory the Illuminator. A century later, in the year 405, the monk Mesrop Mashtuts that created the Armenian alphabet, not as an instrument of administration, but of theology and translation. The Armenian church required a script to which scripture could become Armenian in form and not merely in sound. From that moment onwards, the Armenian people developed a relationship with cultural form unlike any other Caucasian nation. They become, over 15 centuries, a people who carried their civilization with them. When the Armenian islands suffered, the Armenian alphabet remained inviolated. when the political institutions were dismantled, the liturgical music was preserved. When they were dispersed, they did not dissolve, they replanted. In 1770, a Catholic Armenian monk named Mekitar of Sevaste, having fled Ottoman territory, was granted by the Republic of Venice the small island of San Lazzaro in the Venetian lagoon. There, the Mekitastris congregation established a center of Armenian scholarship that flourished for 3 centuries. It was here, in the winter of 1816, that Lord Byron studied with Father Pascal Auscher, later observing that inherent richness of the language amply repaid the toil of its mystery. This is the Armenian genius for portable civilization, not exile understood as a loss, but exile understood as a cultivation. The first Armenian printing press operated in Venice in 1512, and the second in Constantinople. And by the 17th century, Armenian books were being printed in Amsterdam, in Livorno, in Marseille, where the diaspora found a press and a patron. It is into this long tradition that Carlos Gulbenkian was born in Üsküdar, the Asian shore of Constantinople, on the 23rd of March, 1869. Born to a prosperous merchant family, the young Gulbenkian was educated first in Constantinople, then at King's College, London, where he graduated in engineering and applied science at the age of 18. He and his family survived the Amylian massacres of the 1890s, the first systematic catastrophe to strike the Ottoman Armenians. He became, by the turn of the century, one of the architects of the modern oil industry, very deeply related with the aim of this symposium. I will not detain you with the financial history of the Turkish Petroleum Company, of the Iraq Petroleum Company, or the famous 5% that became his epithet. That history belongs to the economic history, and others have told it well. What concerned us today was not Gulbenkian made, it was what he chose. He chose in his maturity to be a citizen of the European civilization in his plural form. He maintained an Armenian liturgical and confessional identity throughout his life. He commissioned in 1922 the Armenian Apostolic Church of Saint Sakis in London in memory of his parents. There he rests today. He was, again, British by passport, but he refused any naturalization that would diminish his Armenianness. In the spring of 1942, having left France under Vichy and refusing to set foot in any belligerent territory, will the war run its course, he came to Lisbon, intended to stay a few months. He stayed 13 years. Why Portugal? The conventional answer was, of course, neutrality, comfort, the Avis Hotel, the climate of Tagus. But the deeper answer lies elsewhere. Portugal in the 1940s was, like Armenia, a small nation anchored at the absolute edge of the continent. They stand as a mirror peripheries, one facing the Atlantic, other the Caucasus. It was, like the Armenian diaspora, a people accustomed to projecting itself outwards through navigation, through commerce, through the spread of a language and faith that had reached India, Brazil, Macau. It was a country that understood what it was to be peripheral to political Europe while being central to cultural Europe. Gulbenkian, the most cosmopolitan financier of his century, recognizing in Lisbon a city that resembled him. Both knew the discipline of smallness. Both knew the resource of memory. Both knew that being on the edge of Europe, it was not the same as being outside it. He died in Lisbon in 1955. The following year, by the terms of his will, the Carlos Gulbenkian Foundation was established as a Portuguese private institution of perpetual duration. Its mandate: art, charity, science, and education. But its endowment, his entire fortune, and his entire collection, in a perpetual duration, as the Armenian culture and ethos. Within that foundation, by a separate clause of his will, an Armenian community department was established in 1956 to serve Armenian cultural heritage, education, and church life globally from Lisbon. Allow me to state that clearly: a Portuguese institution established in Lisbon, serving Armenian cultural heritage globally, founded by the will of an Armenian who chose to bind his legacy to Portugal in the last years, and who never ceased to be Armenian for a single moment of his life. This is not multiculturalism in the contemporary sense. This is something older and more serious. In this European tradition of civitas, of citizenship as a chosen membership in a shared civilization, layered without contradiction across nation, church, and culture and language. When this symposium asks where the Armenian ethos stands within the European metrics, the answer was already been given. It was been given for 70 years by an Armenian Portuguese institution that serves Armenian communities on every continent, from a building in Lisbon, and in Paris, and in other major cities worldwide. The answer was been given by the Mekitastris on San Lazzaro, who since 1717 have preserved the manuscripts of the Armenian antiquity within the Catholic and Republic traditions of Venice. The answer was been given by the Armenian alphabet, designed in the 50th century by a monk who understood that civilization needs form. The answer was been given by every Armenian diaspora that community in France, in Italy, in Greece, in Cyprus, in the Netherlands, in the United Kingdom, and indeed here in Portugal. That was for centuries contributed to the civilizational body of Europe. Armenian culture is not a candidate for inclusion in European civilization. Armenian culture is a constituent of European civilization. It was been. The question is whether Europe is sufficiently conscious of its own composition to recognize what is, in fact, its own. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what cultural diplomacy means. Not the export of national brands, not the negotiation of political alignments, cultural diplomacy means the slow, patient, generational work of recognition, of seeing the cultures that have been built on shared inheritance and of naming them. Carlos Gulbenkian did this work in his life. The foundation he left does this work every day. The least we own him and the culture he served is to do the same. Thank you.
Yeah, really, many thanks. Yeah, unbelievable. Я хочу поблагодарить за ваше
I
представление
would like
гения.
to thank you for your presentation of our genius, Mr. Kilperson, Carlos Gulbenkian.
Хочу поблагодарить вас
And I would like to
за
thank
ваши
you
глубокие знания по
for your deep knowledge. I'm just surprised.
Галус Гулбенкян — это один из наших
Carlos
главных
Gulbenkian is one of our gods, for Armenians.
в 20 веке.
In the
Кто
20th century,
самый великий армянин?
who is the greatest Armenian?
Галус Гулбенкян,
It's Carlos Gulbenkian
Устаник Адуян, Аршил
or
Гурки,
Vustanik Aydogan,
великий
Arshen Gorky,
художник
the great painter
20 века в
of
Америке.
the 20th century in America, or William Saroyan,
Богов,
who is one of my gods,
или Арам Хачатурян,
or Aram Khachaturian,
Шарл Азнаур.
Charles Aznavour.
И как мудро вы это все
And,
представили.
how wisely you have presented it. Cultural diplomacy is indeed much larger
Дипломатии,
than financial diplomacy or financial wealth,
духовное богатство — это
because spiritual wealth brings man closer to God, whereas financial wealth separates man from God and makes them closer to the devil. When I visit the center in Bratislava, I always stay there for an hour and talk to God via Bach. Bach, for me, is a connection with Jesus, with God, and the price of culture, I think, is immeasurable. If the humankind in the 21st century comes back to the cultural heritage, all these bombs and missiles will stop flying. Everything will find its own place. And we'll be explaining, Mr. Lombardi, you don't need to bomb Iran, find reasons for that. You should be listening to Bach. You should look at these huge historic traces that Carlos Gulbenkian left in Portugal and in other countries. And the Carlos Gulbenkian Foundation helps Armenian, even in the 21st century, to hold their culture. Another name, Alex Manukyan in America. The Alex Manukyan Foundation has been funding the Armenian Symphony Orchestra, which has become one of the best in Europe for 30 years. That is what cultural heritage and culture means. I have been just surprised by you, Mr. Valdemar. I invite you to Bratislava. It's a pity that this time you couldn't fly to us. You'll be my personal guest, and I will take all your expenses here. Thank you very much. We have missed a presentation of a very important person, Mr. ex-Prime Minister of Slovakia, a very loud name in the modern politics, an extremely respected person both in Europe and in Russia. Well, the fact that he's very respected in Russia stands in the way for him to be respected in Europe. But on the other hand, in May, he was invited to London. He spoke in the Oxford Club. It's something like Vienna Club, but in London. is just a press, except for Prime Minister Chernogorsky. Ronald Reagan, Harry Kissinger had spoken there. Yes, he's correcting me. Not at the same time. When he was there this time, he didn't see them there. But the other thing, it's a great honor for the Vienna Club that he's a co-chair of the Vienna Club, not just a participant. So I pass the floor to Mr. Chernogorsky, who helped me a lot in 2024 when I proposed a resolution for Armenian genocide to the Slovenian parliament. And before 2024, no Armenian community could do that. And so on the 30th of November, my birthday, we put them to vote and won it without any vote against in the parliament. He helped me a lot in that. And it was Franciszek Miklaszek who proposed that date to put this resolution to vote. And now I'm passing the floor to my good friend and partner. Thank you very much. I will be speaking in Russian. Ladies and gentlemen, another act of a struggle for influence is unraveling the world that is simplistically referred to as the confrontation between East and West. The Armenians know the struggle firsthand. It runs through their entire history. Millennia ago, it was the rivalry between the Roman Empire and Persia, later between Byzantium and Persia, and then between the Ottoman Empire and Persia. It has brought them both rises and falls. Under King Tigranes II in the 1st century BC, they created a great state, the Armenians. They were the first in the world to proclaim Christianity as the state religion in 301 AD. Mount Ararat in Armenia is mentioned both in the Bible and the Epic of Gilgamesh. It was there that Noah's Ark came to rest after the great flood. When a visitor to Yerevan looks at majestic Mount Ararat above them, the thought inevitably comes to mind, yes, this peak deserved mention in the Bible. And the city at the foot of Ararat, Yerevan, if only by virtue of its geographical location, deserves to be the capital of Armenia. But Armenia has also known falls. Surrounded by Islamic nations, it managed to preserve Christianity, but it had to fight and make enormous sacrifices for its faith. After the fall of the Byzantine Empire and the onslaught of Islamic peoples, the territory of historical Armenia in Asia Minor and the Caucasus steadily shrank. Ultimately, for its own survival, the diminished Armenia was forced to ask the Christian Russian Empire for protection. The most terrible tragedy befell Armenia in 1915. The genocide of Armenians, the extermination of 1.5 million people who were either killed directly or doomed to certain death in unbearable living conditions. The diminished Armenia was able to survive only as part of Russia and later the Soviet Union. However, during the Civil War, The Bolsheviks' main priority was victory in the war itself, which required reducing the number of external enemies. Armenia's interests were not a priority, and the Bolsheviks were prepared to sacrifice a part of its remaining territories to conclude peace with Turkey. Thus, Armenia lost more lands, including Mount Ararat. For now, Ararat remains at least in the Armenian constitution, but Turkey demands that its mention be removed even from there. To a European, the historical tragedy of Armenia appears as a fatal imbalance between the outstanding abilities of the Armenians themselves and the number of their enemies. In terms of their potential and talents, the Armenians surpassed their neighbors, but the neighbors themselves were greater in number. In the long term, this balance of power led to a constant emigration of Armenians, even from the few territories that remained to them. In their new homelands, Armenian emigrants have never created security problems. On the contrary, it has become the rule that they achieve high social and, above all, financial success. And not only financial. The fresh poetry and chanson of Charles Aznavour, the work of Sylvie Vartan, Rosie Armin, Marc Ariane, and others, these are the eternal stars of world magnitude. The largest Armenian diaspora settled in Russia, becoming the most successful among all the peoples of the former Soviet Union. This manifests itself in everything, from the popularity of Armenian restaurants in Moscow and other major cities, and the great music of Aram Khachaturian, to the triumphs of Red Army marshals during World War II. Marshal Ivan Bagramyan, Marshal of Aviation Sergei Khudyakov, whose Armenian name is Armenakar Khanferyans, Fleet Admiral of the Soviet Union Ivan Isakov, and others. Moreover, Marshal Bagramyan and Chief Marshal of the Armored Forces Hamazas Babajanyan were born in the same legendary Armenian village in Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh, which gave the world a whole galaxy of great commanders and heroes. Armenian roots on his father's side, Minister of Foreign Affairs Sergei Lavrov, Russian current minister, have you known about that? Today, Armenia is facing a problem of an entirely different nature than in the past. The West is escalating the war against Russia in order to preserve a unipolar world led by the West itself. In this war, Armenia could play the role of yet another front against Russia. Armenia's geographical position is of key importance to both sides. It is in a close proximity to Russian borders and opens access from the south to the Caucasus, Russia's southern defense line. The West promises Armenia everything imaginable and unimaginable, just so it will break its ties with Russia. I see Armenia's prospects in the coming crisis as follows. Theoretically, if Armenia maintains allied relations with Russia, at least at the previous level, today's level, the coming crisis will affect it to the smallest degree. Thanks to its membership in the CSTO, it will remain protected from possible attacks on its territory, will not be drawn into the escalating confrontation between NATO and Russia, and its status will approach neutrality. In that case, it will not be threatened by a war like the one happening in Ukraine. If Armenia does break ties with Russia, it will first of all suffer economically, as it will lose privileged access to the Russian market. However, it will suffer most severely after the crisis ends. Regardless of the outcome of that crisis, if Russia emerges from the crisis as the victor, which is highly likely, Armenia will find itself in the camp of the defeated and will, at the very least, lose Russian protection from its neighbors, who are not going to disappear. It will not get Ararat back onto its territory. Its only hope will remain the Armenians in Russia, and some of them spoke here, that their influence will help soften such unfavorable consequences. If Russia loses the crisis, Armenia will gain, again, nothing. The West will no longer need her, because Turkey or Azerbaijan are far more important to the West than Armenia. The West certainly will not protect her from neighbors whose claims against Armenia will only grow. It should not be forgotten that in Azerbaijan, Armenia is officially referred to as Western Azerbaijan. What I'm going to say could theoretically be considered as an illustration to Ms. Komleva's presentation. Our conference is taking place in Bratislava, and so I can recall the tragic experience from the history of Czechoslovakia. In 1924, Czechoslovakia concluded a security treaty with France and indirectly with England. This treaty served for all participants as a guarantee of security in the event of a threat from Germany. In the case of attack, the states were supposed to come to each other's aid. At the time of signing the agreement in 1924, England and France themselves wanted an ally, meaning Czechoslovakia, on the other, eastern side of Germany. However, by 1938, the circumstances had changed. The details are not important now, and I'm not going to go into them. And both of these powers no longer needed Czechoslovakia. Hitler took advantage of this, making demands for the cession of Czechoslovak territories. His claims were to be decided at the Munich conference. On the evening before the session, the ambassadors of both countries, England and France, visited President Beneš of Czechoslovakia and declared they would not support Czechoslovakia and urged him to yield to Hitler's demands. As a result, Czechoslovakia lost a huge part of its territory. It is precisely such allies that Armenia will choose for itself if it decides to break its ties with Russia, Germany, England, and France. Poland's fate was even worse. It concluded a security treaty with England on the 25th of August 1939, just a week before the war began. In this agreement, both sides again committed to come to each other's aid in the event of an attack on one of them. This treaty also indirectly imposed obligations on France, just like in the case of Czechoslovakia. A week later, Germany attacked Poland. According to the terms of the treaty, England and France were obliged to side with Poland. Although both powers formally declared war on Germany, they took no military action against it. This declared war on Germany by England and France went down in history under the name Phony War, Strange War, Drôle de guerre. The experience of Poland and Czechoslovakia clearly shows that the West has never come to the aid of an Eastern European state unless it was necessary for its own interests. Today's Ukraine is also a tragic example of this. The West itself dragged Ukraine into the war against Russia, but does not send its own soldiers to fight on its territory. It supplies Ukraine with weapons and money, but leaves it to fight to the last Ukrainian. Meanwhile, weapons and money do not represent a great sacrifice for the West. As long as the dollar remains the world's reserve currency, they can print exactly as much dollars as they need. Drawing on the experience of Central Europe, I arrive at the conclusion that states, and in this case Armenia, should approach the conclusion of vital political alliances exclusively on the basis of a deep analysis of their own historical experience and their own national interests. Mere promises of any state made for the moment are not sufficient guarantee. On the contrary, they can cause irreparable harm. A people with biblical roots, such as the Armenians have, bears a special responsibility. Are you listening to me, to its history? Each generation of Armenians is bound by the obligation to do everything possible so that the history of their nation should not move on a downward trajectory. The current generation of Armenians will determine the fate of this obligation in just 1 week. In the elections, as I have already said, the historical tragedy of the Armenians appears to me as that they are far more capable than they are numerous. I wish the Armenian people great love. Thank you for your attention.
Браво, брависсимо.
Bravo, bravissimo.
Последние две выступления
These two latest presentations, Mr. Valdemar and Mr. Prime Minister Chernogorsky,
крылья.
give me wings.
Благодарю Бога, что я
And I thank God that I'm Armenian, because I was started to thinking that I should become a Slovakian. And now I propose that every Slovakian should become an Armenian. Can you see what we are? I didn't know that.
А если серьезно, такой
And
глубокий
to be
анализ,
serious,
который Господь
such deep analysis of culture that Mr. Valdemar made, and such a deep analysis of the current situation, and a clear offer for Armenians on the 7th of June not to make a mistake when choosing their future. This has been presented so clearly by Mr. Prime Minister that we, Armenians, can't say the same with such confidence. So I value your presentation very much, and I'm so happy that these two fantastic presentations were made one after another. Now, we have a very exciting presentation from Anna Malyan, but I can't see her. Professor Malyan, are you on the screen? I can't see you. If not, then we'll give the floor to Irina Sokolova, who just helped us organize this symposium and all of our symposia. She gave us so many people, many great people, that just to say thank you means not say anything. So, geopolitician, journalist of several Italian media outlets in Vatican, and whatever we have discussed here will be published in Italian everywhere. I know that. Thank you. Dear friends, it is a great honor for me to speak today at this very important moment as we reflect on the fate of our spiritual roots. In Europe, which prizes itself on being the cradle of human rights and democracy, an uncomfortable and urgent truth emerges. The persecution of Christian churches is not a closed chapter of the past, but a living and pressing reality, organized by those very state authorities whose sacred duty is to protect them. These institutions, created to defend the people and their cultural heritage, have become silent enemies of the Christian foundations upon which our millennia-old identity rests. Allow me to shed light on this darkness through concrete examples. Let us begin with the Armenian Church, a beacon of faith that has shone for over 1700 years. In 301 AD, Armenia became the first country in the world to adopt Christianity as a state religion, thanks to the preaching of Saint Gregory the Illuminator. This church shaped a unique culture. From the illuminated manuscripts of the Echmiadzin monastery to Khachkars dotting the mountains, symbols of eternal resilience. Yet today, Azerbaijani and Turkish authorities are disputing rights to sacred sites such as Dajyanik Monastery or the cathedral in Shushi, which have been destroyed or confiscated under the pretext of territorial disputes. This persecution echoes the genocide of 1915, when 1.5 million of Armenian Christians were annihilated, and continues with the denial of the Church's role as a living guardian of historical memory. Let us turn our gaze northward to Moldova, a country at the crossroads of East and West, where religious tensions intertwine with everyday politics. Here, state authorities, often influenced by Russophobic or ultra-Europeanist agendas, impose draconian restrictions on Orthodox churches linked to the Moscow Patriarchate, branding them as foreign. Since 2023, dozens of monasteries have been closed, priests expelled, Easter services forcibly interrupted under the pretext of national security. Entire families have been separated, communities destroyed, while the government promotes religious syncretisms that erode the Orthodox tradition. A pillar of Moldovan identity for centuries. This is not protection. This is a calculated attack on the roots of the people. And we cannot ignore the role of a supranational actor, the European Union. Brussels, doling out billions in aid and democratic development, quote-unquote, projects, funds initiatives that paradoxically undermine Christian presence. Recall the programs against homophobia or for inclusive secularism in Moldova and Armenia, which often turn into pressure on denominational schools, restrictions on public religious symbols, and support for secularist lobbies. In 2024-2025, EU funds supported NGOs accusing churches of intolerance, promoting laws that restrict evangelical preaching and Christian education. This is a tragic paradox. The EU, born from the ashes of fratricidal wars waged in the name of Christendom, has become an accomplice in the cultural erosion that leaves Europe without a soul. This betrayal by the authorities reveals a profound crisis. Those who should be protective shields are turning into sharp swords against the millennia-old culture that shaped our continent. Christianity is not a historical elective. It's Europe's DNA. From the Gothic cathedrals of Chartres to the early Christian basilicas of Ravenna, from the philosophy of Augustine to the charity of Saint Vincent de Paul, every stone, every idea, every gesture of solidarity bears the imprint of this faith. To persecute churches is to cut these roots, condemning people to a fluid, depthless identity, vulnerable to ideological deviations. Friends, we cannot allow this to happen. Imagine a Europe where the Armenian Church freely prays on its mountains, where Moldovans celebrate Easter without fear, where European authorities protect rather than destroy. This is our call. Let us mobilize. Let us support international petitions for Armenian shrines, demand accountability from the EU regarding the use of its funds, and educate new generations in the knowledge of our Christian origins. Only by uniting our voices and hearts can we turn enemies into allies and build a future rooted in eternal truth. The persecutions of yesterday and today teach us a lesson. Faith will endure, but it needs us. Let us protect our millennia-old roots with courage and determination. They are our strength, our heritage, our hope. Thank you for your attention. I invite you to applaud to all persecuted churches and a Europe that rediscovers its Christian essence.
Спасибо огромное, дорогая Ирина.
Thank you, dear Irina. Thank you very much. I'm very impressed by your speech. It gets me surprised that by the end of our symposium, we start listening to the most interesting speeches. When we pronounce toasts in Armenia, it seems like the most interesting toasts are in the very end of the festivities. It's just like here. And it's followed by Mr. Samvel Ayvazyan, the representative of the Armenian community in Serbia and representative of the Armenian communities in Europe, here in Europe. Is it there in Belgrade, Samvel, by the way? Okay, Samvel is not here. Then I would like to invite Mr. Haik Ayvazyan, head of the Lewis Information and Analytical Center.
Я здесь.
Is Mr. Ayvazyan here? Yes, Mr. Ayvazyan is with us. Then the floor is yours.
Спасибо, добрый день всем.
Yes, thank you very much, everybody, and thanks very much for inviting me over.
Я хотел бы начать
I would like to start with the
исторических фактов,
historic facts
которые как бы могут пролить свет
that can actually shed some light on the situation which is going on,
дать понять, какова связь
and
между
let people know
прошлым,
the connection
настоящим и,
between the
наверное, будущим.
past, the present, and the future. When in 1605 the Shah of Abbas in Persia had deported
около 300 тысяч армян
approximately 3,000 Armenians to Persia,
в течение примерно
then during
220 лет на
220 years, in the course of 220 years, this area had not been populated with any Armenians. And after that,
например, тот же Исраил Ори был
Israel
такой
Ori,
армянский лидер национального
the Armenian leader
который
of
пытался
the movement for freedom,
найти
who
способ
had tried to find a way of
владычества Турции.
liberating Armenia from
Он ездил по
the
Европе,
yoke of
пытался найти
Turkish
помощь,
Empire.
но
And he went to Europe
Европе
and he wanted
такой
to
помощи не
find some
нашел.
assistance and
И
help,
в конце концов,
which he failed to do.
помощь пришла
Finally,
из России,
help came from
тогда, во времена
Russia
Петра
in Peter,
И только
during
когда
Peter the
в
Great times, and then
1827 году
in 1827,
русские войска
when the Russian
командованием
troops,
генерала Ивана Паскевича
commanded by General Paskevich,
освободили Ереван,
had freed Yerevan,
фактически Армению от персидского
and they
владычества,
had
после
freed
этого
Armenia from
началось переселение
Persian
армян,
domination, the
которые свои
relocation
переселяли
of Armenians
отсюда в свою историческую
started
родину.
to the historic land.
Кстати, в этом участвовал тогдашний посол в
And
Персии,
the
посол
ambassador
Российской империи в Персии,
of the Russian Empire in Persia, Griboyedov, had participated in that mission.
не могут простить того,
Still,
что он
he
сделал.
cannot be forgiven by
Пару лет
the
назад,
Englishmen
точнее говоря, в 19
of what he
году
had done by the 19th century in Yerevan.
облили краской его памятник.
His monument
До сих пор вот
was destroyed by a
агентура не
jar
может
of
простить
paint.
того, что этот человек сделал для
Those people
Армении. Хотя
still cannot forgive
его имя
his deeds for
большинство
Armenia.
даже и не знают, кто
However,
был и
most
что
of
он
the
сделал.
people don't even know his name or
Потом,
what
когда,
exactly he
если
had
мы
done.
перейдем уже в начале
And then,
20 века,
if we go back to the early 20th
что
century
тогда происходило?
and what was
В
happening back in the day,
1920 году
in
Армения была
1920,
фактически союзником
Armenia
Антанты, то
had
есть
already been
западных
the
стран.
ally of
Нам
Antanta,
обещали
the
территории,
Western
выход
countries.
к морю,
We were
потому
promised
что, например,
the land
Сербского
and
договора
the
и по
access to the
решению
sea, according
президента
to the
США
Serbian
Вудро
agreement
Вильсона.
and by
Но мы
Woodrow
так и ничего не
Wilson's
получили. В
decree,
результате
but we didn't get
в
anything as a result.
1920 году
And in 1920, as a result,
была очередная война
yet
армяно-турецкая, в результате
another
чего
Armenian-Turkish
Армения
war had
проиграла, и мы
started,
подписали
which resulted in
Александро-Графический
Armenians'
договор, и нам
capitulation,
доставалось всего 10
where we
тысяч
were
квадратных
given
километров.
only 10,000 square
После этого,
kilometers
когда
of
тогдашняя
land,
Россия договорилась с
followed
Турцией,
by
и
an agreement
нам
of
было
Russia and
возвращено
Turkey back in the day,
примерно 20 тысяч
where we
квадратных
had been
километров,
given
и
back
Армения
approximately
стала
20,000 square
той
kilometers of land,
территорией, которая
and
сейчас
at that time Armenia had
у
become
нас есть. Хотя могло бы быть
in the
больше,
boundaries that we currently
если бы
possess.
в
However,
начале
we could have been a bigger
1921
country
года
if in the
в
early
Ереване не был совершен переворот
1921
антифактически
a coup
российский.
d'etat
И
had
многие в
started
России
in
заявили бы,
Armenia,
что
the pro-Russian one, so that the new government would not say that they would like to be friends with Turkey, and the foundation for that friendship would be the Alexandropol Treaty. There were negotiations going on in Moscow with three parties involved, and Moscow had insisted on Turkey's returning some of the lands to the Western Armenia. According to estimates, it would account for 70,000 square kilometers. According to some sources, we may relate to 110,000 square kilometers of land to be returned to Armenia. When Russia was pushing Turkey, a coup d'etat had happened in Yerevan. They said that their representative in Moscow was not legitimate, and the negotiations in Moscow failed. The new regime, the new power, would write letters to Ankara with the demand from Turkey to provide weapons to be used against the Russians. It had all become known, all those negotiations in Ankara had failed. However, we would say that Nagorno-Karabakh could have become part of Armenia, which was already being included as one of the republics of the Soviet Union. And one final thing that I would like to add here, in 1915, and we know in 1915, genocide of Armenians started, and 1.5 million Armenian people had been killed. Here I would like to quote some of the statements of then Prime Minister of Great Britain, David Lloyd George, who spoke about that in 1918. A very brief quote. So, by sending all of the troops all over the world, Russian troops would have to occupy Armenia before necessary reforms would start. That was cancelled in Berlin 1878. It was the result of the pushing measures and had become a triumph of England, the honored peace. Armenia was considered to be a victim, to be put on the altar of the triumph victory. Russians would have to leave, and Armenians would have to be stomped on by the feet of the previous yoke. It led to the massacre of 18th century and of the 19th century and the 20th century, early 20th century. The last one being 1915. Prime Minister had expressed his regrets about what had happened, yet he had said that British interests had prior interests to what had happened to Armenia, and they would have to be taking the leading role in opposing Russia rather than protecting Armenians from the genocide. Even then, back in the day, the West trying to undermine Russia would have to put on the altar small countries and small peoples. Whether they were regrets or not, the fact is the fact. The consequences followed of the genocide. As far as the European Union is concerned, I would just like to give you a quick note. The current authorities in Armenia keep speaking about sovereignty. They claim that Armenia should become independent. In 2023, a new criminal code had been adopted in Armenia with the article with a specific felony punishment provided for claims to decline sovereignty. So declining sovereignty of Armenia is a felony. By providing reasons for that, the authorities of Armenia said
что такое, по их мнению, понятие государственной
what they
суверенитета.
mean by
И заявили,
government
что
sovereignty.
государственный
They
суверенитет это
claim
присущее
that government
государству верховенство над своей
sovereignty
территорией
is the position of the government on the territory and independence in international relations. So legally, it's the leading position, and independence of the state should be manifested in real social activities. It was said quite well. However, the intention of Armenia to join EU is in contradiction with that statement of independence, because in the agreement on EU functioning, some articles provide us with the fact that Brussels is being given an exceptional right to resolve some issues, especially when it touches upon making joint decisions. The decree would claim that the member states fulfill their competences according to the EU Council solutions. That's Europe that started in the very beginning in the 1950s and the 1960s and the 1970s is no longer with us. It was left in the past. Today, European Union is filled with bureaucracy, and the bureaucratic European Union has confiscated and impounded quite a lot of elements of independence of the member states. In CSTO, for example, all of the decisions are made unanimously, and without Armenian vote, decisions are not made. So there are no things that stipulate sovereignty, although such limitations are there, so that when the authorities claim that they would like to provide sovereignty for Armenia, contradicting with themselves. If they want sovereignty of Armenia, they wouldn't have to join EU, because there is a direct contradiction.
Сегодняшний Европейский союз, я не имею в виду Европу, именно
So today's EU, and I don't mean Europe, but the bureaucratic machine of the EU, is a noose in the hands of the US for our European countries to make them do what they want. And we see today that Europe is being pushed towards a conflict with Russia. Of course, the US stands to gain from it, because a conflict between Europe and Russia would make both sides weaker, and the US will play the role of the arbiter. And of course, it's beneficial to them. So they would see to both competitors to weaken down, and then come to the US as arbiters. And another point regarding Armenia. Today, the Armenian army is being actively migrated to the NATO standards. For several years already, no collaboration between the Armenian and Russian ministries of defense is being conducted. That brings us to the thought that because NATO wants to war with Russia, but through the hands of other people, Armenia is seen as a resource for that. The Ukrainian army has already been moved to the NATO standards. The Georgian army has been transferred as well. And now the same thing is happening with Armenia. So after that, from the south of Russia, a strike fist will be formed to fight Russia. Actually, Britain had such plans in the beginning of the 20th century, when it was planning to create a united army of Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia to wage war with Russia. So it's obvious that we're being led to follow this scenario. And in conclusion, I would like to mention the following. When, in the beginning of the 20th century, Armenia and the Armenian people suffered huge losses, of course, the then authorities of the First Republic of Armenia also made a lot of errors. And in 1924, the first Prime Minister of the First Republic of Armenia offered a formula how Armenia and the Armenian people can stay safe and secure, providing for the stable development in safety for dozens of years. And so the formula he has arrived at was like this. Armenia should hold to Russia, and together with it should keep the entire Transcaucasus region in Russia's influence area, even against the desire of their neighbors. So Armenia came to an understanding that we can't wage a policy that some other countries can. So the only deterrent that can hold back Turkey is Russia. Therefore, indeed, in order to provide for the stable development and security for the Armenian people, Armenia should play a role and help Russia to keep Transcaucasus under its influence. In any other role, Armenia will lose. And I would like people in Europe to understand this as well. So the sober-thinking people. So the authorities can change, the elites can change, while we will always stay next to Turkey. So we, the Armenian people, need to have long-term guarantees. So only as an ally to the Russian civilization we can retain our identity and security. And only in this case will be able to really build real, equitable relations with the Western world. Because in this case, we will not face risks and will not have concerns of being used as a tool in the fight against Russia. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much. Thank you. I have one question. In which year it happened that the Armenian government, perhaps it was in 1920, I think, that they didn't want to be with Russia, and they ceded 10,000 square kilometers. Which year? In 1920, they finalized in the beginning of the year, yes. And then in 1921, at the beginning of 1921, the new government in Yerevan claimed that they want to be friends with Turkey based on the Alexandropolis the treaty. That's Simon Bachan. Oh, I know this person. And what you said on behalf of Kajasoni, I am kind of positively shocked. I didn't know that he became so wise, because he, together with Simon Marcian, was part of the civil government. I would recommend you to read him. It's called An Open Letter to Z, Russia or Turkey. He wrote it, and if it's not a problem for you, I'll send it to you. You know my email. That's phenomenally important for me. And I can say that I have been pleasantly surprised by your presentation. I'm very happy, and please stay with us, stay in touch. We would like to work with you. Thank you very much. There was also a person from Armenia, Mr. Anastas Israelian. Is he here? I can't see him. Or is he here? Ah, yes, you are. But I can't hear you. I can see you, but I can't hear you. Yes, yes, can you hear me now? So, Mr. Israelian, let me introduce you. The founder of the Artsakh movement. The topic is the choice of the Armenian people, the Eurasian Union or the European Union. And the answer is don't change horses midstream. You're welcome. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity you have afforded. Thanks to the organizers for giving this opportunity to the person sitting in front of you, the person who stayed alive after the genocide of the 21st century. I come from Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, part of the population that has survived this difficult time. These events that were happening in front of the eyes of the world. You know, Nagorno-Karabakh, the Artsakh question, the situation with Artsakh was like a regional indicator of stability. While Artsakh was a place, the stability was available for the neighboring country. But after the loss of Artsakh, we see what happened and in which situation we are today. It's becoming worse and worse. I have joined this conference from almost the very start and listened to all the speakers. Many thanks to the people who specifically mentioned Artsakh in their presentations. Today, we have a big problem in Armenia itself to speak about Artsakh, about the rights of Artsakh people. They are oppressing us day after day, starting with threats and all the way to other methods. They pressure us. They don't want to see us here. They don't want us to be in Armenia because if there are no Artsakh people around, there's no Artsakh question on the agenda. It's very hard for me to say this because at the very high level, the leader of the country who was in his position while these all things were all happening. If at such a level the question is being asked, why are you still alive? Why haven't you died? Can you imagine what kind of hatred, what kind of disrespect, what kind of ugliness towards their own people is being expressed. And you know, this is the way he behaves. He continues to behave this way because not loving Artsakh people, he hates all other Armenians. It doesn't matter whether these are Armenians from Artsakh or from other regions. We are one and the same people. It's a millennia long. We have a millennia-long history, and where we are today, I believe it's a common tragedy for the entire Armenian people. A person like this should not be in the position leading the whole nation and representing the interests of this nation, either worldwide or within the country. It hurts me, it pains me, because a character like this, I have a problem refraining myself from very harsh words, because I speak every day to people, and while we're discussing this, these are the same words that we address to people who have committed crimes against their own nation, who have committed treason to their own nation, following their own interests, who have betrayed their nation. We have become victims to this scum. I don't fear these words. I've lost everything. My brother is a prisoner in Bakum. I lost my motherland. I lost my family members. And my position today is that for the sake of the Armenian people, for the sake of me belonging to this nation, for the sake of my faith, look, my approach is like this today. I am going to continue fighting for the rights of Artsakh, of the Artsakh people, because in our history, one of the only places where Armenians have always lived for thousands of years, and this is one of those areas. Artsakh was. It has a millennia-long history, and we, by admitting these people, we brought them to the power. And by this, we lost a very serious point of national pride, of dignity. Artsakh have always been a matter of pride for every Armenian. In Artsakh, they always respected the traditions and values that people were admiring when visiting Artsakh. How were we able to preserve all this? Why am I approaching this from so far away? So for me, the choice between the EU and the EU is, we have been betrayed by everyone. We have been betrayed by everyone in the sense that everybody was looking at us as some player, so based on human rights and democracy. And we, the people of Artsakh, we're believers. We were believing in all this. And a moment arrived, and the last time I saw Ruben Vardanyan, and he was arrested the next day. I was in close contact with him, and such a great man. I hadn't and haven't met a man of the same stature in my life that I would admire so much. For me, it's always an indicator. If I'm not admiring, and I'm not talking about words, I'm talking about this concentration of Armenian patriotism. The last time I met him, the moment was that we had to get out of there, to find a way to get out of there. And he told us, look, we have been betrayed and sold. There's an understanding that we have been betrayed, but there's also an understanding that we have been sold. And can you imagine, we have been both betrayed and sold? And I asked him, even to that extent? And he said, yes. And they said, this all was said by a man
Последний день я его в глазах видел.
And the last day I saw in his eyes,
Его вот этот,
saw this,
как сказать, ну,
how to put it,
горячий вот этот взгляд
hot,
его,
this
что вот
hot
у нас
way
была
of looking.
возможность спасти
So
Арцах.
we
У
had
нас
an
мы
opportunity
могли
to
бы
save
оставить
Artsakh.
Арцах
We
армянским,
could
да?
have
Что я
make
могу сказать
Artsakh
по поводу
stay
Евросоюза
Armenian.
или Евразийского,
What
да?
can I say about
А это все было
the
на
EU
глазах
or EAEU? It was all happening
подписан
under the
был
eyes
на
of
площадке
EU.
Евросоюза.
It
Признание
was
Арцаха
signed
территорией
in
Азербайджана,
an
подскажем.
EU venue, I
До
mean,
сих пор
ceding Artsakh to
вот
Azerbaijan.
такой преступности, которую против
Up
человечности
until then,
совершился со стороны,
such a
скажем,
crime against humanity that
Азербайджана,
was
Алиева,
conducted by
до сих
Azerbaijan,
пор
represented by
никакой
Aliyev.
предъявлений,
So up until
никакой,
now,
как бы,
no
привести к ответственности,
responsibility,
никаких
claims
шагов
of
мы
responsibility
такие не
have
видели, не заметили со стороны тех
been made
стран, чьей площадке
from
был
those
подписан
countries
сдача Арцаха.
on whose venue the surrender of
И
Artsakh was signed.
недавнейший здесь вот этот
And the
Евросоюз,
recent
который здесь вот
EU
был саммит,
summit
представляете,
that
ни
was
одно
held
слово
here.
про
Can you
это
imagine?
народа,
Not a
ни одно
single
слово про этих
word
людей, которые
was
остались
said about these people,
поихние
about these people
ошибочные решения
who
и поихние, как бы
were
сказать,
hurt through their blame, through their
неправильной
wrong decision, through their
дорожной картой решения этого вопроса.
wrong
Мы на
roadmap.
сегодня мало того, что
So
остались без
far,
крови, остались
we
без родных и
have
близких,
stayed
мы на своей
without
родной
our
земле
blood,
даже
without
себя
our
не
family,
чувствуем
and we
защитной
can't
связью.
even feel
Какой
ourselves
как
protected in our own
Мне
motherland.
тяжело
It's
просто, я
hard
хотел
for
просто
me
вот на двух словах
to say this. I just wanted to
Мне
wind
просьба
up
почаще
with a
говорить
couple of
про
words.
Арцах,
So
почаще
please
поднимайте
mention
этот вопрос,
Artsakh more
почаще
often. Please raise
права
this
арцахцев,
question more often.
почаще,
Please
если
speak
максимально
about
возможно,
Artsakh people rights
продвигайте этот вопрос
more
на
often. If you have any
площадках,
opportunity to push this question at
держитесь
different
на
venues,
контактах
please stay in touch
колхозско-арцахской, которая здесь в
with
данный
the
момент находится
leadership of
в
Artsakh
Армении.
people who are now in Armenia
Нам очень
today.
тяжело.
It's very hard for us, but we need Artsakh. We need to come back. We need to restore Artsakh. Yes, thank you, thank you. There's no need to remind us of this because we are not less Artsakhian as you are. We're here in Europe, prepared to fight for Karabakh. Prime Minister Chernogorsky is sitting here, and we were in Karabakh for the first time. He was a Ministry of Justice there, and Levon Natsakanyan, a chief of the General Staff of Artsakh, he took us to the front line where they were shooting. And Mr. Chernogorsky even stood higher than, how to call this, this khramat in Armenian, the trench. And Armenian soldiers jumped at him, pushing him down in the fear that he would be shot by a sniper. I mean, we know what Artsakh is all about. František Miluška mentioned this in the morning. For us, it's a big surprise that this so-called prime minister sold Artsakh for, as I said, $5 billion that I was offered. The first Armenian who was offered this bribe was myself, then Serge Sarkisyan in 23. And it was rightly said, he betrayed and sold. And the fact that we are going to keep fighting, don't doubt that. Because, as I say, for us, Artsakh is Armenia. We have lost Artsakh, and we can lose Armenia.
В этом плане
And in this respect, we are ready to collaborate, cooperate with you. This has been the first opportunity for us to talk to you, and thank you very much. We've only got one brief presentation. No, Lubice? Shall I not give the floor to Mr. Brookmeyer? Shall I give you the floor, or can you do without that? Lubice, no, we don't have 5 minutes. No, 5 minutes, Lubice, no. No, Lubice is not allowing us. No, we can't give František floor to you.
Ти почуваєш, ти не почуваєш. Говорим же, не máme час. Вона говорить, же конець. Час не máme.
She's saying that we don't have time anymore. Lubica says that it's over. So she's the chief.
Можеш без виступування, alebo chcеш?
Can you do it without the presentation? Lubica is saying no. Okay. In that case, let's agree to skip Mr. Brookmeyer's presentation. We are going to prepare the conclusion, the concluding documents together with our lawyers. One is sitting next to me, it's Prime Minister Chernogorsky. The other, Robert Amsterdam, and we have others. We are going to prepare the final document, and we'll be sending it to the organizations that can extend influence. And we're waiting for the 7th of June. We're looking forward to it, hoping that and trusting that the Armenians should, God forbid, make another mistake once again. So thank you very much. And till we meet next time at the next symposium. Thank you. Bye.